So we're going to focus on a couple of these very big categories. We'll try and speed this up a little bit because we're kind of rehashing some of the themes here. But smartphones or global handset growth, is continuing at double digits. Basically, this is revenue, unsubsidized spending. Units is going to be high. Having said that, one of the features of particularly the mobile handset market is that whatever measure you take, the average selling price of a handset has actually gone up for 2 years running, which is pretty much unheard of, and that's all down to smartphones. Doesn't matter how you measure it, and so actually, this is pretty much in tune with the unit growth. Now that's not going to carry on forever. Clearly, as smartphones take a larger proportion of the market, and the price within the smartphone category comes down, as it is doing all the time, that's going to eventually impact on overall revenue growth within the mobile handset category in total. But right now, it's still surging on upwards. Unit growth for mobile handsets in 2011 was something like 26%, higher than in 2010. Real acceleration in the marketplace. And really that just shows smartphone share still not that high globally. It's still a long way to go. I think that everybody has a smartphone. It's not true. Not true yet, anyway.
But see, with those growth rates, we'll
get there.
Share, yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, assured. Yeah, so regionally speaking, we've kind of dissected the globe to show you feature phones versus smartphones. And this is 2011, and it's very small print down here at the bottom left. So we're looking at 2011. What's interesting here is that you can already see that smartphone shift to smartphones starting to really happen in earnest in a lot of the developed economies, while some of the more emergent ones are still really grappling with feature phones as their markets really start to take off, if you will. And I also want to underscore the importance of this mobile handset category for a lot of these emerging markets, because they don't have landline infrastructure, and they're not going to invest in that. As Steve talked about earlier, a lot of these emerging economies are leapfrogging. They want today's technology. They don't want a CRT type TV. They want an LED TV. So this is why we're seeing, and it's this growth here in mobile handsets is very important to developing business and just developing the overall region from a business standpoint in a lot of the emerging economies. Smartphones, though, still across the board really seeing robust growth, but China really driving that, I think, Steve, with this 121% growth rate. Just astonishing growth that you see.
China, Japan, and developed Asia.
Yep.
Very strong market.
Yep.
We class China within emerging. And that's purely if you look at GDP per person, for example, still very low. Still a long way to go.
I heard feature phone growth slowed dramatically in China. Is that true? I mean, I know that you have it aggregated, but...
Well, let's just see.
Well, we don't have it broken out.
We don't break out different countries, but as a component.
Talk to you afterwards.
Yeah. Of that. So emerging APAC, really, the feature phone's definitely slowing, 6%, but 69% growth for emerging APAC for smartphones. Again, really hitting on all cylinders, as Steve was talking about earlier. That's why that penetration rate for smartphones will just continue to increase.
Do you have a slide that shows the base for these? Because these are all just percentages.
Correct.
Yeah, there were some slides previous that I think showed some of the bases we have, but also we're trying to condense the content. This is a lot of content. And again, ladies and gentlemen, it would help us tremendously if you could hold your questions to the end, so we can move through our slides, and then we can address all of them. Thank you.
Just one important thing in terms of a driver of smartphones is subsidy, particularly in Western Europe. And one of the things that's really striking about how the market has developed is that up until 2009, networks were really pulling away from subsidy. They weren't getting the value back from that, and the subsidy pool actually got to a minimum in the second quarter of 2009. Okay, Apple changed things. Once the iPhone sort of started to gather pace, the network operators, whether they chose to or not, really ended up having to plough more into subsidy. And as a result, the amount of money that they've been pushing into subsidy in Western Europe has really gone up. And that's clearly helped to drive the market in Western Europe for smartphones. You can see it's now a lot of subsidy going into Apple, but also a lot of subsidy going into Android. And it's a really telling chart, I think.
Well, and subsidies, too, are really the catalyst for all this growth that we've been talking about, certainly in a lot of these developed economies, because in absence of that, I mean, not as many people would be that excited about smartphones if they had to pay $800 for one. So the fact that carriers are able to work out the business case where they can offer that subsidy, right, Steve? I mean, so in the long term with your contract, they're making it up on the back end, if you will, but able to offer that subsidy. So I think it's something important to just keep in mind that we don't owe it all to these subsidies, but they do play a role.
Absolutely. And also the other thing that is a will start to affect the feature phone market even more is the shift of smartphones down into the low end. You can see two different examples here, which are very telling. Typical developed market, Western Europe, very focused on high-end smartphones. That's where the bulk of the market sits in terms of value, and relatively saturated, so not a huge amount of growth. Look at emerging Asia. There's growth at the high end, yes, there's growth in the mid-range, but below $275, which we class as below 200 euros, that's where the market growth is. And in fact, the market growth is lower than that, it's below $200. We're expecting about a quarter of the global growth to come in that category next year, or this year. And actually, this, in fact, is going to account for 81% of the cheap smartphone category as a whole is going to account for 81% of the total growth in smartphone revenues next year. It's really, really significant. So there's going to be a big shift. And if you look at kind of the typical models that are selling well in these different categories, you look at the high end, it's basically the same phones. So if I put a small s and a big S, which I shouldn't have done, but basically the same phones at the high end. Pretty similar phones in the mid-range as well. But quite a lot of difference at the low end in terms of products that are currently positioned to sell. So, and this is really where kind of, I think the next battle is going to be in the smartphone market, is in that low-end bracket, because that's where the growth is going to come from.
Precisely, and so as you're roaming South Hall, we have so many of our handset vendors, and then of course there are some that are also in some of the international pavilions. This is just something to consider, because a lot of these brands are not competing equally across the globe. Take Huawei, for example, very strong in Latin America and elsewhere, but really doesn't really have a presence here in the US. Likewise, Nokia, a very established global handset brand, small presence here in America, but a much larger presence in Western Europe and elsewhere in the globe. So when you're talking with the likes of Motorola and Sony Ericsson, it should be on your list to talk about, what markets are they really pushing for and really driving for to gain share within. So it's an important conversation point. Absolutely.
We're going to move on because we're running out of time. This is the one slide where this data is out of date, so there's no point taking a photo of this slide. Really, there's no point. We've just revised our projections for tablet PCs for 2012.